There is a version of Emma Raducanu that the tennis world decided it already knew. The one who burns bright, implodes under pressure, cycles through coaches like the rest of us, cycle through streaming subscriptions, and ultimately confirms what the skeptics always whispered, that Flushing Meadows 2021 was lightning in a bottle, unrepeatable, a fluke dressed up in a fairy tale. I believed that narrative for a while, I'll be honest with you. Not completely, not cruelly, but there were stretches across 2023 and 2024 where even I found it harder to argue against. Then Emma Raducanu walked onto a grass court at Queen's Club on a mild London summer evening, dispatched Iva Jovic in straight sets, and booked herself into a final against the kind of crowd energy that physically reverberates through your chest. And everything I thought I knew needed recalibrating. Let me tell you exactly why this matters, and I mean technically, psychologically, and historically, because if you just take the surface result at face value, you are missing the most interesting story in women's tennis right now. First, the tactical picture, because this is where my genuine excitement lives. Jovic is not a soft draw. She is ranked 17 in the world at the time of this match, a player with serious ball striking credentials and the kind of flat, penetrating forehand that tends to punish players who sit too deep behind the baseline and give it time. What I observed in Raducanu's performance, and this is the part that genuinely surprised me, was how aggressively she managed the tempo war. She was not content to rally from a defensive position and wait for errors. She was stepping into the court on second serve returns, taking the ball early, and essentially refusing to let Jovic settle into any kind of rhythm. That is not the Raducanu of 18 months ago. That is a player who has made a conscious, coached, deliberate decision to impose pace rather than absorb it. The service game was equally revelatory. What I've noticed when watching Emma in past seasons is a tendency for the serve to desert her precisely when the match gets tight, not because the mechanics collapse, but because the mental weight of a critical moment triggers subtle grip tension and the ball toss drifts marginally forward. Classic anxiety-driven technical regression. But against Jovic, when she found herself 0-40 down in a service game, a moment that in previous iterations of this story would have felt like quicksand pulling her under, something different happened. She held. The crowd, and specifically those three die-hard fans she later called out by name essentially, those ratters chanters in the corner, they gave her something to anchor to. She found her first serve, she closed the game, and she moved on. That single moment, in my assessment, is worth more analytically than the entire scoreline combined. Now I want to zoom out, because context is everything in this sport, and I think we owe it to the story to actually place it properly. This is Raducanu's third career WTA final. Her first title came at the US Open in 2021, the most astonishing Grand Slam debut in the Open era. Full stop, no asterisks, no qualifications. 17 matches without dropping a set, coming through qualifying, beating players ranked inside the top 30 repeatedly in the same fortnight. People still argue about what it meant. Some say it was conditions, a depleted draw, a once in a lifetime alignment of variables. My view has always been simpler. You cannot go 17-0 in a major without something real inside you. The question was never whether the talent was genuine. The question was whether the infrastructure around that talent could be built before the window closed. And this is where the past 2 years become essential viewing for understanding what we are actually watching at Queen's this week. Because the period between that US Open triumph and this London semi-final has been, by any objective measure, brutal. Coaching changes that generated more media column inches than they deserved, a wrist surgery that robbed her of months of court time, ranking fluctuations that were frankly dizzying to track, results that never quite matched the expectation ceiling that had been constructed around her. I watched a lot of those matches. I sat through losses where the body language told you everything. Shoulders caving inward, head dropping between points, the thousand-yard stare that players develop when they stop trusting themselves and start surviving rather than competing. But here is what I think most of the mainstream coverage missed during that period, and I feel strongly about this. Raducanu was not regressing. She was building, quietly, painfully, without the visible results to show for it. Her team stuck with her through what she herself described as some really tough moments in the last few months where the results haven't been going our way. That language matters to me. We've been putting in work day in, day out. That is not the language of a player in freefall. That is the language of someone who understood that the foundation was incomplete and chose to keep laying bricks even when no one was watching and the scoreboard wasn't rewarding it. This is something I find myself drawn to almost more than the match results themselves. The psychology of sustained commitment when external validation disappears. Most elite athletes, and I've analyzed enough careers at this point to say this with some confidence, experience a specific kind of crisis when the results and the effort stop correlating. The mind starts negotiating. It asks dangerous questions. What if this is as good as it gets? What if the effort isn't the answer? The players who break through to a second chapter of genuine relevance are almost universally the ones who refuse to let those questions become conclusions. And I genuinely believe Raducanu belongs in that category now, not because of one semifinal win, but because of the way she has spoken about the journey, with gratitude for her team rather than bitterness at her circumstances. Back to the tennis, because I don't want to get so lost in the narrative that I neglect what was actually happening on the grass. The match against Jovic was, from a technical standpoint, Raducanu's most complete performance in recent memory. And I say recent memory carefully, because I'm not just saying this week, I mean across an extended stretch. The thing that jumped out at me most was the decision making under pressure. Raducanu is a player with extraordinarily clean ball striking mechanics when her confidence is intact. She generates deceptive pace through exceptional rotational efficiency and a very clean contact point. But what separates today's version from the 2022 or 2023 version is the decision about where to put that pace. Against Jovic, she was selecting the right targets. She was going cross court when the geometry demanded it, and redirecting down the line only when she genuinely created the angle. That sounds simple. It is absolutely not simple. That is match intelligence, and match intelligence is the last thing to develop in elite tennis and the first thing to erode under pressure. And the grass suits her. I want to be direct about this because I think it's underappreciated. Raducanu grew up playing at Bromley Tennis Centre. She has spent her formative years navigating the specific demands of British grass, the low bounce, the slick surface, the way the ball skids through, and demands you make decisions about half a second earlier than you would on clay. At Wimbledon in 2021, she announced herself to the world before the US Open even happened, reaching the fourth round as a teenage wildcard. Grass removes one of the pressures that has historically troubled her. It compresses the rallies, which means there are fewer extended exchanges where doubt can creep in, fewer opportunities for the tactical second guessing that has sometimes undermined her in baseline wars on hard courts. What I am watching now at Queen's is a player who is genuinely in her element, not just technically, but emotionally, and the crowd connection matters here more than it would for most players. I watched her post match interview carefully, and the way she talked about the fans, with real, unperformed warmth, calling out specific supporters, asking them to come back for the final. That is a player who is drawing genuine energy from the environment rather than being suffocated by the expectation of it. That distinction is enormous. Home support can destroy players as easily as it can elevate them. The British sporting public is passionate, but it has weight. Ask any footballer who's ever played at Wembley with a nation watching and felt the crowd become a burden rather than a gift. Raducanu at Queen's this week is using that weight as a launchpad. This is her second top 20 win of the tournament. Think about what that means in terms of accumulated match sharpness. She has not scraped through against lower ranked opponents and fluked her way into a final. She has beaten quality players consecutively in an environment where fatigue compounds and the legs get heavy and the decisions get harder. That is a genuine, legitimately earned path to a final, and the implications for her world ranking and trajectory are significant. This result moves her in a direction that, if she can sustain any version of this form into the grass hardcourt swing and beyond, resets the entire conversation about where she sits in the women's game. Now let me tell you what I am watching for in the final. Everything hinges on the first four games. I've noticed a pattern across Raducanu's best recent performances. She needs an early emotional affirmation, a moment that tells her nervous system that she belongs in the match. At 0-40 in that service game against Jovic, holding was that moment. In a final, those moments come differently. The opponent will be prepared. The pressure will be different from anything she's faced this week. And the question I cannot answer with certainty yet is whether the mental architecture she's been quietly constructing is strong enough to hold in that specific crucible. I believe it is. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely believe she can win this title. And if she does, it won't be because she got lucky, or because the draw was kind, or because the stars aligned the way they did in New York 5 years ago. It will be because she went through the fire, rebuilt something real in the dark, and chose to trust her team and her work when the results weren't coming. That is not a fluke. That is character. And this Queen's Club crowd, the ones chanting Radders at 040, they can feel it too. The sun set over London on Saturday evening, and Emma Raducanu stood on that court, asking the crowd to come back one more time. If you've ever wondered what resilience actually looks like when it's tested and refined and finally allowed to breathe, I'd suggest you tune in on Sunday. This is the one.